Hello everybody and welcome back to Strategy Guide Reviews. My name is Blake Grunman and I am back with another strategy guide. This time around we have God of War. Now one thing I did want to start out with early on in the review is take a look at this cover. Just want to take a second and soak that in. And don't worry about my little stickies. But if you look at the actual guide itself, honestly the first thing I thought of when I was looking at this was, boy, that sure looks like a game magazine from the 1990s. I realize that this is not the collector's edition, and there is a collector's edition for this guy that is a nice leather-bound, hardcover book. This right here, this looks tacky as hell. I'm sorry. I look at this and it does not look professional to me. It does not look like the kind of guide that I would want to spend my money on. Now, granted, it's $14.99. So it's targeted probably at the audience that isn't going to go out and spend money on the big one. So you got to grab their attention maybe by using terrible layout. I don't know. Like I just looked at this cover and I'm so frequently looking at them and going, wow, those are really well put together. Those are really nice. And then all of a sudden you're looking at this one going, wow, that's just tacky as all shit. I'm sorry. It doesn't really give you a good first impression, to be very honest with you. So as we're looking through the guide, one of the things that kind of is very interesting is, you have starting out with like, hey, here are the basics, your breakdowns of different items. Here are your game mechanics. And so you can kind of see that they do a good job of having lots of screenshots in with the individual mechanics, which is cool. But see over here on the side of the screen here, this is where they're talking about lost items. What's interesting is, see, it goes all the way down there to bottom. Then it continues on the very next page and starts at the top. Couldn't you guys have tried to find a way to get that on one page? I mean, I don't understand, because this is just like a hodgepodge of different things. So they're talking about valuable loot and Kratos' health and rune stones and earning XP. Couldn't you have combined a few of those together and maybe filled in this space over here so you could find some way to try to get it all on one page? I mean, that's just yuck. I'm sorry. It's just and what I found throughout this guide is it seems rife with kind of these decisions as far as the design is concerned, where you go, all right, the content is good, but just the way that they put this together, they just kind of slapped it all together. It was kind of it was pretty off-putting, I'll be completely honest with you. Now, as I was looking through it, now one of the things that I did find interesting is you see like these little call-outs right here for things like the favors, and it talks about what you need to do in order to do these favors for different characters in the game, and what the favor is and how they begin. Now you look at this, and what's interesting is this right here actually becomes a much bigger breakout later on in the guide, but there's nothing in the front here that says anything about, hey, if you look in the back, this content is covered. So it's in the table of contents, sure, but the fact that it's not called out here, if I was just trying to read through it and I saw this, I'd be, well, okay, so I need to talk to Brock, okay, I need to talk to Brock. That's all you give me? That's all you give me at all? Like, it's nothing that would be helpful. Now granted, like I said, in the back, which we'll kind of get to in a little bit, that is covered, but just little things like this where it's like, hey, make it more readable, guys. Come on, tell me that there's going to be another section where the content is covered more in depth. Just kind of common sense things that it's very obvious that the content of the guide itself, at least it seems like the content in the guide itself was written in a way that design was not being considered. Like, all the content is there, but it doesn't say, hey, this is going to be in a whole different section later. Maybe that wasn't put together at the time that they wrote this. But still, just kind of general flow things. It would have been nice to have that general kind of information. And then you get to these sections where they talk about all of Kratos' skills and how he can upgrade his stuff. And many, 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 many pages of graphs and charts with information. But one thing I wanted to focus on is, if you're looking at it at a distance, take a look at the font size on these individual sections. The font is so small, the camera can't even manage to focus on it. If a camera is having a hard time reading it, how are you supposed to be able to read it with the human eye? I was having a ton of difficulty even reading this. It's one of those where I'm using the guide and I'm like, am I going to have to go to use the e-guide just to be able to read this crap? It was, the information in there is valuable. Like, you want to read it. And in many cases, I found myself literally having to go to another room where it was better lit just in order to be able to read the content on the page. That's not good design. That's not good design at all. I mean, space and stuff, I realize, yes, it's going to use more pages and it's going to cost more to make the book that way. I get that. However, if I need to have a magnifying glass to read your guide or your charts in your guide, that's a problem. That's a genuine problem that needs to be dealt with. And just the whole, hey, you can use the e-guide, okay, fine. That's a fair assessment, and that comes free with this. However, I want to use the book. I like using the book. And when the font is that itty bitty, it's pretty hard. Like my wife, who doesn't use guides, I went out to her and I was just, hey, honey, am I crazy in thinking that this font is small? And her comment to me was, oh, wow, yeah, that's really, really small. So, I mean, if she's looking at it and she's seeing the same things, then that kind of says a lot. Now, again, you have a lot of this preamble that continues to go on, more and more pages of charts after charts after charts. It's Excel the game. Like, there are so many layers of charts in here, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, you want it to have a lot of depth to it. And once again, tiny freaking font. Like, I get that they want to try to get all the information on the page, but for God's sakes, make it so it's actually usable. It's just, the content is there, it's valuable, you want to be able to read it, and it just feels like it's a waste when it's put in that way. And then another curious choice is, you've got these really, really dark fonts, and maybe it doesn't show up as well on the video, but you have these darker, richer colors that it just makes it hard to read the font against that kind of a backdrop. And it just kind of, why? See, when you're over here, it's fine because it's nice and bright and lit, but then when you get it up against these dark colored backgrounds, it just makes it more difficult as well. When it's already small, you're not really doing yourself any favors. Now, when you get into the actual walkthrough itself, the meat of the guide, this is where things tend to get back on the rails. So, one thing that you'll notice right off the bat is there's a lot of screenshots in this guide. And I don't know if this is to compensate for the fact that there isn't really like any original artwork or anything like that in here, which there really isn't aside from the maps and maybe a header image, which I'm convinced is probably a screenshot from the game to begin with. Aside from that, there are a lot of screenshots inside of this guide. I mean, a lot. And I've had times where I've used, or that I've reviewed guides, and I've complained that there weren't enough pictures. I would almost argue that this goes back the opposite direction, to be too many pictures. Now, that said, everything that it has, it spells it out really well. The content that that's written about each piece, it makes sense, and it really does help genuinely understand what's going on throughout the guide. And sure, there are some pages where it's less prominent, but still, I mean, it's pretty crazy the amount of images that are in here. And some might chalk that up to just a design choice. I would like to think that it's being more thorough, and actually every picture that's there, it has a legitimate reason to be there. It directly is adding to the commentary that's written, so that's good. And actually the walkthrough itself is very solid. The content that's written inside of it, it's helped a lot. Now, there are a few times where there was kind of vague wording like, hey, this is not the right place to die. You don't want to die here. Or, hey, be sure when you're going to take these people that you've leveled up these specific weapons. They don't really say, hey, here's how they can be used to help you, but make sure that you have them going in. It's kind of, okay, a lot of times you can connect the dots and figure out what they're going for. But, just some of those times it's kind of odd. Now, when you encounter big unit types, for the first time, and in boss gate fights, you'll see that they have these call-outs where it's like, in this case, fight the troll, and it breaks down all the different things that he's going to try to do. Hey, he's going to try to stomp you, he's going to try to slam you with this big slab, you want to try to strafe around him and do different attacks, and it kind of breaks it all down. And then again, it does the same thing for the big fight with the stranger, which you find early on in the game. These are really well put together. I really like this a lot. And as far as thorough walkthroughs are concerned, I think that this guy does a really good job of covering the content well. Now, one thing that you will find kind of interesting is as you're looking through this, just kind of the way that they lay some of these things out, you'll see that they have artifacts at different points in here. And yes, that's very helpful. And there are other items in the game that I felt like there were things missing from the guide. Like I was finding artifacts that weren't in the text. The interesting thing is, at the very, very beginning of the entire walkthrough, there is actually a disclaimer that actually talks about, at the very beginning, that hey, this walkthrough, it's not meant to be the comprehensive find everything, the quote-unquote find everything walkthrough. This is purely a critical path walkthrough. It's like, here is what you're going to do to stay on the main line and get through the mainline quests. So the fact that those artifacts weren't in there, they weren't showing up on the maps, those were kind of things that I wished had been there. And the fact that they weren't was kind of disappointing in that respect. Now, another interesting note here is you can kind of see how they break everything out. And what they've done is they have these big maps, and at the beginning of every main hub section, you'll have these larger call-outs, like the Lake of the Nine, and then all of the submissions that go along with it. These are really, really nice. Now, when you enter into the smaller sections, that's where they kind of drill down and give you a little bit more detail. But the one thing that you'll notice is, and this is more about God of War in general, the inside of that map, it's a lot of open area. A lot of open area. And so what you end up happening is trying to get yourself across the map to different locations, because there aren't really points of reference along the way. It's like, hey, go from number 15 to number 17. What the hell is in between there? It makes it a little bit more difficult to get between point A and point B. Eventually you'll figure it out. You can use the in-game map as well, but it just kind of makes it a little bit more difficult to try to navigate in certain scenarios. Now, one other thing that I did find kind of interesting is that as I was going through this, I did find some interesting scenarios where, well, I mean, I don't want to be too much of a jerk about it, but there were, it was more grammatical errors, and not like, hey, they used the incorrect words. It was incorrect spacing in between words. Like you'd see a double space here, or hey, there's a space, comma, space, to link up a part of a sentence, where it's just like little grammar things that I would have liked to have seen it caught. But again, not a huge deal in the big picture. Now, let me see if I can find an example of that, because I thought that I used one as one of the points in here. Well, I'm not finding it, so apologies on that. I can't seem to track that down at the moment. But anyway, now, one thing that I did like, and this is one thing that I've always had a criticism with guides about, is that if you can see here, what they do is they have the screenshots, and that's normal, that's fine, but they actually went and circled the item that you're looking for. So many times they just say, oh yeah, you'll see it here in the screenshot in the middle of the screen, or hey, you want to look for something that looks like this object right here. Instead, they actually call it out. Please circle the picture. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, just little touches like that where I looked at it and went, okay, you know, they're trying to clean up the format of things. And again, as far as the actual content of the walkthrough is concerned, it's a good guide. It really is. I don't have any complaints about that. And honestly, if you're just looking for just the straight walkthrough piece of it, very solid. Very solid. Now, the fact that it doesn't go through and talk about a lot of the favors, which it calls out at the end, there aren't any references as you're doing the walkthrough that, hey, if you want to do side quests, go to the back and find this content here in the back section of the guide. I wish that they had done that, because they really do have good walkthroughs of all of the different favors that you're handling, and they do the same thing for the different realms as you're going through them. So the realms are essentially these little side quests that you can go through, and you have little challenges that you need to go through and complete all of the different objectives. And as part of this, you end up with a whole different series of additional missions, and there's a lot of side content in the game. So they put it in the back so that you can try to track it down, but there's nothing that really directly calls your attention to it while you're doing the walkthrough. So it kind of feels just like Me Too content, where, all right, if I want to try to get everything, I've got to go back, and now I need to go and backtrack through the entire game to try to find these specific pieces. Where instead, if it had given me the option to say, hey, look at this section in the back if you want to go and clear up this content now, that would have been more helpful for my progression through the guide. And again, like they said at the very intro, they do make a very big point of trying to call that out, that, hey, this is not an end-to-end walkthrough, it's critical path. So again, I probably should have known better, but that's the way it goes. And then they talk about the different trials at the very end. So, I mean, there's a lot of great content in here, and you can try to work through a lot of these additional items and find some of these additional collectibles based off of what's in the back of the guide. That's great. That's fine. It's so bizarre that when I get to the end, they're talking about, oh, hey, here's your lava ancient. Get ready to turn to the next page, and that's it. This right here is one of, I think 5 or 6 pieces of in-game art total that I found in the guide. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then you have those sections early on where there is so much content being crammed onto the page. And then you have these other sections where there are just big, huge gaps of white space. Like, couldn't this have been spread out in a way that you weren't going to be leaving so much real estate open on the page itself? I mean, big chunks of white space. So when you're trying to smash everything in there to begin with, and you're already having to use obscenely small fonts for your maps and things like that, maybe try to find a way to spread things out a little bit. But when I got to the end, I came to realize that there is no walkthroughs of any trophies. These are things that, just kind of common things that you'd see in the index. There's none of that walkthroughs. There's no breakdowns of, hey, here's just every item in every area. You don't really have anything like that. It's all just spelled out directly through the walkthrough. Now, if I'm looking back through my notes here, the fact that there wasn't really a whole lot of flair, like the original artwork, things that have been provided by Sony, stuff like that, it felt like it was really lacking. A lot of the guides that I've had lately, I felt like they had a lot more of that content, and there wasn't really anything to be found here. Maybe, to be fair, maybe in the collector's edition they have more of that content, and maybe that's what is special in the collector's edition. I don't know. But in this version, it just felt, it was very no frills, like here is your content. And that's about the end of it. Now, again, just to kind of recap, one, that's a really hideous cover. We had several sections where things were very, very small, very difficult to read. It had a solid walkthrough, good content that was put in there, and very, very liberal use of screenshots. I would almost go as far as to say there might be too many screenshots, which is odd. You do have things like it's lacking trophies, and it's lacking callouts to go back to other sections for the additional non-mainline content. And just kind of the overall organization of the guide kind of just seemed a little bit off to me. Now, I do think that if you are looking for something to provide you information as you're playing through the game, I think this is a very valuable resource for you. I just don't know that it's some of the best stuff that Prima's done, to be very honest with you. So overall, I would recommend looking at it if you need it for the walkthrough, but otherwise, you may want to steer clear of this one, or maybe do their e-guide. Because then you actually get access to the content without necessarily having to worry about the organization. So overall, the paperback version of this guide, I'm going to give a 3 out of 5. Thank you guys very much for watching, and keep it locked.